Come closer, lean in toward the embers, and let the weight of the day fall from your shoulders. The world outside is fast and loud, but here, in the glow of the hearth, time moves differently. I want to tell you a story not of kings who shook the earth with their boots, but of a man who moved across the sand with the grace of a shadow and the heart of an anchor. His name was Amir, though history would come to know him by another title. But before the titles, before the great journeys across the horizons of the East, he was a young man in a city of stone and heat. Let us go there now. Imagine the air of Mecca just before the sun crests the jagged black peaks of the Hijaz. It is a blue hour, cool and thin, smelling of parched earth and the lingering scent of wood smoke from the night's cooking fires. In a modest house of sun-dried brick, Amir would rise. He was a man of remarkable height, lean and sinewy like a well-tempered blade, with a face that seemed carved from the very cliffs that surrounded him, angular, thin-bearded, and marked by eyes that saw more than they spoke. He did not rush. Even in his youth, there was a deliberate stillness to him. He would wash his face with water kept in a porous clay jar, the liquid cool against his skin, a brief reprieve before the inevitable heat of the day. Breakfast was a simple affair. A few dates, perhaps a piece of dry barley bread dipped in olive oil. He ate with a quiet mindfulness, listening to the first stirrings of the city. He could hear the distant grumble of camels being loaded for the caravans and the rhythmic asterisk clink-clink asterisk of the metalworkers beginning their toil. To many, this was merely the noise of survival. To Amir, it was a tapestry of human effort, and he respected it deeply. He was a man of the marketplace, a merchant by trade, yet he walked through the souks with a spirit that seemed untouched by the greed that often stained the stalls. As he made his way toward the center of the city, the sun would finally break over the horizon, turning the gray dust into a shimmering gold. Imagine the marketplace as he saw it. It was a labyrinth of shadows and light. There were the heavy, pungent smells of raw leather, the sweetness of dried figs, and the sharp, medicinal tang of frankincense and myrrh brought from the south. Men shouted their prices, arguing over the thickness of a cloak or the strength of a grain sack. Amir took his place among them, but he was different. He did not shout. He did not use the flowery, deceptive language of the huckster. He would lay out his goods, fine fabrics and well-tanned skins, and he would wait. If a man came to buy, Amir would look him in the eye with a gaze so honest it was almost disarming. He weighed his goods with a hand that never trembled, ensuring the scales were perfectly balanced. He believed that a transaction was not merely an exchange of coin, but a contract of souls. If there was a flaw in the silk, he pointed it out before the buyer could ask. If the price was too high, he adjusted it without being prompted. People began to notice. They called him the Amin asterisk, the trustworthy. Long before he led armies, he led by the quiet example of his integrity. He spent his midday hours in the shade of a stone archway, watching the world pass by. He saw the wealthy merchants draped in silk, their chests puffed with pride, and he saw the beggars in the dust. He wondered, in those long, contemplative silences, about the nature of a man's worth. Was it found in the weight of his purse, or in the weight of his word? He was a man who listened. When others spoke, he gave them his full attention, his head tilted slightly, his silence a form of respect that invited people to speak their truths. He was learning the most difficult craft of all, the mastery of his own ego. He did not seek the center of the circle. He was content to be the stone that held the circle together from the edge. As the afternoon sun began to bake the city, turning the cobblestones into embers, Amir would often retreat to the outskirts of the town. He sought the silence of the desert, where the only sound was the wind whistling through the dry scrub and the occasional shift of sand. There he would sit and reflect. He felt a growing disconnect between the chaotic, often cruel world of the city and the profound, ordered silence of the stars. He was a man waiting for a signal, though he did not yet know what it would be. He thought of his ancestors, the men of the Fihr clan, and the traditions they held dear. He respected the past, but his heart searched for something more enduring than the shifting sands of tribal politics. He sought a truth that did not change with the seasons or the whims of powerful men. In those quiet moments, Amir cultivated a rare kind of strength, a strength born of gentleness. He knew that the loudest voice is rarely the wisest, and the sharpest sword is the one that stays in its sheath. He was preparing himself, though he knew it not, for a life of immense responsibility. As the sun began to dip, painting the sky in bruises of purple and deep orange, he would return to his home. He would walk past the great stone structures of Mecca, his shadow long and thin against the ground. He would return to his simple meal and his quiet room, satisfied that he had lived the day with honor. He had cheated no one. He had spoken no lie. He had remained a pillar of calm in a sea of noise. Sleep would come to him easily then, the deep and restorative sleep of a man whose conscience is clear. The desert night would settle over the city, the stars emerging like diamonds scattered on black velvet. And there, in the heart of the ancient city, Amir ibn al-Jarrah would rest, a humble merchant of cloth and leather, unaware that the dawn of a new era was just over the horizon, and that his name would one day be whispered with reverence by generations yet unborn. But for now, the city is still. The fires have turned to ash. The camels are silent. And we, too, shall rest, carrying with us the image of a man who found greatness in the quiet honesty of a morning's work. Close your eyes now, and let the silence of that ancient desert evening wrap around you like a warm cloak. The story has only just begun. Chapter 2, A Quiet Conversation Beneath the Stars. Let me tell you about an evening in the year 634, when the desert air had grown cool and the stars emerged one by one above the Syrian plains. Abu Ubaidah sat outside his tent, a simple structure of woven goat hair that provided shelter but little more. The canvas still held the warmth of the day, though night was settling in with that particular stillness that comes to open country when the wind pauses to rest. He had removed his sandals, worn leather, dusty from the day's walk, and placed them carefully beside the tent opening, as was his habit. In his hands, he held a wooden bowl, smooth from years of use. The evening meal had been simple: dates, bread made that morning by one of the camp bakers, and a small portion of yogurt that had been kept cool in an earthen jar buried in the shade. He ate slowly, methodically, the way a man eats when he has learned that food is a gift, not to be wasted or hurried through. Around him, the military camp stretched across the landscape like a temporary city. Fires dotted the darkness, small points of orange light where soldiers gathered to share their own meals, to mend equipment, to speak in low voices about homes left behind. The smell of smoke drifted through the air, mingling with the scent of horses and the faint, dusty perfume of the Syrian earth. Khalid ibn al-Walid approached from between the tents, his footsteps nearly silent despite his size. He was a man who moved with a warrior's economy of motion, nothing wasted, nothing announced before it needed to be. Abu Ubaidah heard him anyway. His ears had grown keen over the years, and gestured to the ground beside him without looking up. The bread was better yesterday, Khalid said, settling onto the earth with a grunt. He carried his own bowl, his own portion of the simple fare. The baker's daughter is ill, Abu Ubaidah replied quietly. Her father's mind was elsewhere today. Tomorrow the bread will improve, God willing. They ate in silence for a time. This was their way. Two men who had known each other since youth, who had fought side by side through campaigns that had reshaped the world, who needed no constant words to maintain their companionship. The stars continued their ancient emergence, the sky deepening from purple to black, and somewhere in the distance, a horse whinnied softly. I received word from the northern scouts, Khalid said eventually. The Byzantine forces are regrouping near Damascus. They're bringing in reinforcements from the coast. Abu Ubaidah nodded slowly, finishing the last of his dates and setting the bowl aside. He wiped his hands on a cloth, then folded it with the same careful attention he gave to all small tasks. How many days until they're ready to engage? A week. Perhaps 10 days if the mountain passes slow them. The commander of the army, for that was Abu Ubaidah's position now, though he wore no special insignia, no crown or badge of office, tilted his head back to look at the vast tapestry of stars above them. The Milky Way stretched across the heavens like a river of light, and he found himself thinking, as he often did in quiet moments, about the smallness of human concerns beneath such immensity. Do you remember, he said softly, when we were young men in Mecca and we thought we understood what courage meant? Khalid smiled, a rare expression that softened his weathered features. We were fools. We were young, Abu Ubaidah corrected gently. Which is perhaps the same thing. He paused, choosing his words with the care of a man who had learned that words, once spoken, cannot be recalled. I thought courage was the absence of fear, the ability to face an enemy without trembling. And now I think courage is acting rightly despite the trembling. Despite the fear that wakes you in the dark hours before dawn, whispering that you are not equal to the task before you. A breeze moved through the camp, carrying the scent of sage from the hillsides. Khalid was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice held an unusual softness. You doubt yourself. Every day, Abu Ubaidah said simply. Every decision. Every order that sends men toward danger. How could I not? He turned to look at his old friend, his face barely visible in the starlight. 10,000 men look to me for direction. 10,000 lives rest on choices I make while eating dates outside a tent. The weight of that. It doesn't grow lighter with time, my friend. It grows heavier. Yet you carry it. Because someone must. Abu Ubaidah picked up his bowl again, though it was empty, his hands needing something to hold. And because I learned long ago that leadership is not about being the strongest or the wisest. It's about being willing to bear the burden when others cannot. The two men sat together as the night deepened around them, the stars wheeling slowly overhead in their eternal dance, the camp settling into the rhythms of sleep, and tomorrow's challenges waiting patiently in the darkness ahead. Let me tell you about the stillness of the migration's first night, a quiet corner of history that holds the seeds of greatness, a night that shaped the life of a man named Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah. Imagine the scene. The dust of the journey from Mecca to Yathrib, now known as Medina, had settled, and the first night had fallen. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of dry grass and distant wood smoke. Abu Ubaidah, a man of 40 years, stood outside the modest shelter that would be his home for the coming nights. He looked up at the sky, the stars bright and familiar, a silent witness to the momentous journey that had brought him here. The day's journey had been long, the caravan winding through the desert, the sun beating down mercilessly. Abu Ubaidah, a man of sturdy build and weathered face, had walked alongside his camel, his sandals kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. He had been a leader among his people, a man of wisdom and counsel, but tonight he was just a man, alone with his thoughts in the vast expanse of the desert night. He entered his shelter, the scent of dried palm leaves and earth strong in the small space. The ground was hard, but he had spread out his cloak, a worn but familiar comfort. He sat down, the rough texture of the woven wool familiar under his hands. He reached for his water skin, the leather warm and supple from the day's heat. He took a sip, the water cool and refreshing, a small but precious comfort in the harsh landscape. Abu Ubaidah leaned back against the wall, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, the reasons he had left his home behind. He thought about the future, the uncertain path that lay ahead. He was a man of action, a leader, but tonight he was also a man of reflection, a thinker. He reached for his prayer rug, the soft wool a contrast to the rough ground. He spread it out before him, the familiar patterns comforting in the dim light. He knelt down, the worn wool soft under his knees. He closed his eyes, the silence of the night enveloping him. He took a deep breath, the scent of the desert filling his lungs. He began to pray, his voice low and steady, a whisper in the night. As he prayed, his thoughts wandered. He thought about his family, left behind in Mecca. He thought about his friends, his companions on this journey. He thought about the people of Yathrib, their new home, their new beginning. He thought about the challenges that lay ahead, the struggles they would face. But he also thought about the opportunities, the chance to build something new, something better. He finished his prayers, his mind calm and focused. He stood up, the prayer rug soft under his hands as he rolled it up. He sat back down, the cloak still warm from his body. He reached for his food, a simple meal of dates and bread. He ate slowly, the sweetness of the dates and the coarse texture of the bread, a simple but satisfying meal. As he ate, he thought about the day ahead. They would need to establish their new home, find water, build shelters. He thought about the people they had left behind, the families, the children. He thought about the responsibility he had, the role he would play in this new community. He was a man of wisdom, a man of counsel, but he was also a man of action, a leader. He finished his meal, the last of the dates sweet on his tongue. He leaned back, the cloak soft under his hands. He closed his eyes, the silence of the night enveloping him. He listened to the sounds of the desert, the faint rustle of the wind, the distant call of a night bird. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, the reasons he had left his home behind. He thought about the future, the uncertain path that lay ahead. But as he lay there, the cloak soft under his body, the silence of the night enveloping him, he felt a sense of peace. He had made his choice. He had taken his path. He was a man of wisdom, a man of counsel, but he was also a man of action, a leader. He was Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah, and he was ready to face whatever the future held. And so, under the silent stars of the desert night, Abu Ubaidah slept, his dreams filled with the promise of a new beginning, a new life in the city of Yathrib. The stillness of the migration's first night had shaped him, had prepared him for the journey that lay ahead. And as he slept, the desert winds whispered stories of the future, stories of courage, of wisdom, of a life well lived. Let me tell you about a particular kind of morning in Medina, the kind that slips past the hours without fanfare, a morning that Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah knew well. Imagine the town at dawn, the cool brass of the sky softening, the date palms standing like patient sentries along the lanes and around the gardens that fed the people. Medina was, and had long been, an oasis, palm groves and wells shaping the days of those who lived there. And he lived among them after the long journeys that had brought him from his birthplace. He was a man known in the records for a quiet steadiness, for trustworthiness, for a life paired to what was necessary. The historians who wrote of him left a steady line, that he carried responsibility without seeking to magnify himself, that he preferred simple lodgings, and that his household was plain. Let your ears take in the small sounds of such a home, the scrape of a wooden door, the soft rustle of coarse cloth, the faint crackle as palm fronds dry in the sun. He would rise without ceremony. Accounts tell us he lived simply. When people speak of his diet, they speak of bread and dates, and whatever the day provided, unadorned and adequate. Those are the small things that steady a man, the small things that teach him how to bear weight. He would go out into the cool light, and the scent of the oasis would be there, dust mixed with the sweet, compressed smell of dates, the faint mineral tang of the well water. The palms made their own music when the wind moved through them, a slow, rustling conversation. In that sound, he could measure the morning. There were neighbors passing with baskets, children with sandals slapping the earth, and the neat, ordered commerce of a town where much depends on the cycles of planting and harvest. The groves did not ask for grand plans. They asked for steady hands, for attention at the right time, pruning, guarding against heat, watching for pests. Those are the small, repetitive labors that teach a man patience. You must understand that Abu Ubaidah carried responsibilities that reached beyond this immediate circle. The historical record places him among the leaders of his time, a person entrusted with command and with the administration of slivers of public life. Yet the same sources note how small his needs were, how often he refused to make his private life any larger than it had to be. That contrast shaped his mornings. There is an ordinary wisdom in rising early, in walking slowly among the palms, in letting the day form itself before you answer the calls of duty. He was also a man who had to make small decisions that mattered. Men in his position were confronted with questions about distribution, about fairness. They handled the receipts of battle and campaign. They were entrusted with the means of others, and the records tell us he was careful with that trust. He did not hoard. When faced with surplus, accounts say he placed the needs of others ahead of his own. That choice was not a dramatic one at the moment it was made. It was a daily practice of restraint, as steady as pruning fronds to allow a new shoot to grow. Imagine him standing at the edge of a small plot, feeling the roughness of a palm trunk under his palm, deciding to give to someone in need rather than to keep for himself. Such acts were as ordinary as the scent of ripe dates, and as consequential. There were evenings when he sat with a handful of men and spoke in few words, listening more than speaking. Those who wrote of him remarked upon his economy of speech and the solidity of his counsel. In the hush after dusk, when the lamps were lit and the town softened to a low glow, he would reflect on the day. The palms would not stop whispering. The smell of cooking, perhaps a simple stew or a pot of grain, would mingle with the damp earth. In those quiet hours, he made small calculations in his head about what his people needed, about which men were weary and which could be sent back to rest. The world of his responsibility moved in increments, in the allocation of grain, of shelter, in the small arrangements that kept a community steady through hard seasons. There were moments of doubt, as there are in every steady life. The records are not shy about noting that he was human. A leader who refuses comfort must sometimes wonder whether his austerity is enough, whether the distribution he engineered is fair in the eyes of those it affects. He would listen for reasons, for complaints, for the small voices that rise in the market and in the shade of the palms. He did not dismiss them. Wisdom, as later commentators observed, was not the loud pronouncement, but the patient correction, the slow tending of a grove so that it would bear fruit year after year. He also knew the tactile truths of work. The dates, when ripe, are heavy and sweet. The palm fronds scrape the skin. The well water carries the taste of the land. He understood the worth of what grew in his town, and that understanding shaped his judgments. The palms were a reminder that life turns on cycles: planting, pruning, harvest. In private, he would sit and think of those cycles and of the lives that depended upon them. That thoughtfulness informed small decisions: when to send men to gather, when to hold back, when to repair a roof, when to allow a grocer to charge less because a family had fallen on hard times. Night came softly in those years, and with it a kind of reckoning. He is recorded to have been a man of calm habits, tending what was close at hand, answering to duty without ostentation, refusing to make his household a place of show. The palms outside would creak like old boards, and the cool would bring the scent of date sweetness up from the soil. He would sleep with the knowledge of who depended on him and the small list of tasks for the morrow. That was his way: quiet, honest work, and the steady companionship of an oasis that taught him, hour by hour, how to govern himself before he governed others. So remember him not as a figure in a far and thunderous tale, but as a man among palm trees, in the slow rotation of days, learning from the land the lessons of provision and restraint. There is a kind of wisdom that grows in that deliberate, unadorned rhythm, and it is the kind he carried like a simple cloak across the years. Let me tell you about a particular evening, when the weight of a great trust settled upon the shoulders of Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah. The great conquests were behind him. The open fields of battle had given way to the close, quiet walls of a governor's residence in Syria. He had become the custodian of peace, a duty he found to be, in its own way, more demanding than war. The story begins not with a proclamation, but with a quiet walk. The sun had dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of violet and deep blue. The day's heat, which had baked the stone courtyards, was beginning to lift, replaced by a cool, whispering breeze from the north. Abu Ubaidah had finished his final meeting, a long discussion with local farmers about the irrigation of their orchards. His advisors had retired, the scribes had put away their ink and parchment, and the administrative hum of the day had faded into a profound silence. He stepped out into the central courtyard of the governor's house. It was a simple space, paved with worn stone, with a single ancient olive tree growing in its center. He did not call for a lantern. Instead, he stood for a long while, allowing his eyes to adjust to the soft, blue light of the gathering night. The first stars were beginning to prick through the velvet of the sky. A sliver of a moon, a delicate silver crescent, hung low in the west. It was in this moonlit courtyard that he felt the full measure of his responsibility. His days were no longer defined by the clarity of a marching column or the strategy of a battlefield. They were filled with the intricate, delicate threads of human need. He thought of the scrolls in his study, reports of grain stores, petitions for repaired roads, letters from distant towns seeking fair judges. Each parchment represented a person, a family, a community trusting him with their well-being. He felt the physical presence of this trust, a gentle, constant pressure on his heart, like the weight of a well-worn cloak. He walked slowly to the olive tree, its gnarled trunk a familiar companion. He placed a hand upon its rough bark, feeling the deep grooves and the resilient life within. Here, in the quiet, he would reflect. He remembered the faces from the day. The old farmer with hands like leather, worried about the water for his apricot trees. The young widow who had come seeking a ruling on a piece of land left by her husband. He had listened to each with the same focused patience he once gave to scouts, reports before a battle. To him, these were the true fronts now. A servant, noticing his master in the courtyard, approached silently and placed a simple wooden stool and a cup of water on a small table near the tree. Abu Ubaidah nodded his thanks, a small, quiet exchange. He sat not on the stool, but on the low stone edge of a planter, feeling the coolness of the stone through his simple linen robe. He drank the water slowly, savoring its cool clarity. His philosophy in these matters was not recorded in grand speeches, but lived in these small, daily decisions. He believed that justice was not a single monumental act, but 1,000 tiny, consistent ones. Fairness in the distribution of grain. Impartiality in settling a dispute between a powerful merchant and a poor carpenter. Transparency in the use of public funds. He knew that the strength of the community he served was built not on fear, but on this granular, everyday integrity. A trust broken in a small matter, he felt, was like a crack in a foundation, barely visible, but weakening the entire structure over time. The moon climbed higher, its silver light now casting the sharp, black shadow of the olive tree across the pale stones. The breeze carried the scent of jasmine from a nearby garden, and the distant, comforting sound of a nightingale. In this sensory stillness, his inner thoughts were calm but deliberate. He acknowledged the doubts that sometimes visited him in such moments. Was he doing enough? Were his judgments sound? But these were not fears. They were the necessary companions of a conscientious mind, the counterweight to arrogance. He rose, his movements slow and considered. The weight of the trust was still there, but it felt familiar now, a part of him. It was not a burden to be set down, but a responsibility to be carried with care, like a precious vessel full of water for a parched community. He took one last look at the moon, that silent witness, before turning back toward his chamber. The scrolls would be there in the morning, the petitioners would return, the threads of governance would need his hand. But for now, under the watchful stars, there was only the quiet courtyard, the scent of jasmine, and the profound, sobering dignity of a promise kept, one peaceful day at a time. Come closer, child. The fire is settling into a soft, amber glow, and the night air of the valley is beginning to cool. Lean back. Let the weight of the day fall from your shoulders like an old, heavy cloak. Tonight, we reach the end of our journey with the man they called the Trustworthy. We find him not in the heat of a desert crossing, nor in the high halls of a palace, though he could have claimed any palace he desired. No, we find him in the quiet, swaying reeds of the Jordan Valley. It is the year 639, and a heavy stillness has fallen over the land of Syria. Imagine the scene. The sun is dipping behind the purple hills of Judea, casting long, golden shadows across the camp at Amwaz. The air here is thick, scented with the sharp tang of wild thyme and the damp, earthy breath of the river. Abu Ubaidah sits outside his tent. It is a simple thing, made of coarse wool, no different from the tents of the youngest soldiers under his command. He is an old man now, his beard silvered by years of wind and sun, his skin etched with the maps of 1,000 journeys. He is the governor of this vast, fertile province, a man whose word moves armies and shapes the fates of cities. Yet, as he sits on a plain mat of woven palm leaves, he is peeling a piece of dry bread, dipping it into a small bowl of vinegar. He eats slowly, with a quiet mindfulness. He has always lived this way, carrying only what he needs, holding the world as lightly as a bird holds a branch. He looks at his hands, calloused and steady. He reflects on the nature of a promise. To him, leadership was never about the height of a throne, but the depth of a commitment. A messenger had arrived some days before, breathless and dusty, bearing a letter from the great leader in the north. The letter was an invitation, a plea really, wrapped in the guise of an urgent command. It asked Abu Ubaidah to leave the valley immediately, to come to the safety of the highlands, away from the shadow of the sickness that was moving through the camp like a silent mist. Abu Ubaidah had read the letter by the light of a single oil lamp. He had felt the weight of the friendship behind the words. But then he looked out at his men, the fathers, the sons, the weary travelers who had followed him into this green land. He picked up his pen, his movements slow and deliberate. He wrote back with a gentle firmness, stating that he would not seek a safety his men could not share. He would remain until the end, a shepherd staying with his flock as the sun went down. Now, as the stars begin to prick through the velvet blue of the evening, Abu Ubaidah rises. His joints ache a little, a reminder of the miles he has walked. He begins his nightly walk through the camp. Listen to the sounds he hears. The low murmur of men talking by their fires. The rhythmic chewing of the camels. The soft splash of the Jordan River nearby, a constant, cooling song. He walks without guards, his footsteps light on the dusty earth. He stops at a tent where a young man is shivering with the fever. Abu Ubaidah does not pull away. He kneels. He places a cool hand on the lad's forehead. He doesn't offer grand speeches. He offers the quiet strength of his presence. He speaks of the river, of the way the water always finds its path to the sea, and how man, too, must find his way with grace. He moves on, his silhouette passing through the flickers of firelight. He thinks about the cities he has seen, the white marble of Damascus, the ancient stones of Jerusalem. He realizes that the greatest structures are not built of stone, but of the trust between people. He had spent his life building that trust, brick by silent brick. He reaches the bank of the river. The water is dark, reflecting the silver sliver of the moon. He stands there for a long time, watching the ripples. He feels a slight heat in his own blood now, a heaviness in his chest. He knows the silent guest has finally come for him as well. He is not afraid. He feels a profound sense of peace, like a traveler who sees the lights of his home appearing through the fog. He reflects on his philosophy of enough. He had always sought to have just enough, enough food to sustain him, enough wool to clothe him, enough courage to do what was right. In the end, he realizes, when everything else is stripped away, all a man truly owns is his integrity. He turns back toward his tent. The camp is falling silent. The fires are dying down to red embers, much like ours are now. He lies down on his simple mat. He can smell the cooling dust and the faint scent of the river reeds. He thinks of the friends who have gone before him, their faces like stars in his memory. He closes his eyes. He isn't thinking of the battles won or the provinces governed. He is thinking of the quiet joy of a promise kept. He is thinking of the way the morning light looks when it first touches the hills. The trustworthy one breathes slowly, in and out, matching the rhythm of the wind in the trees. He has finished his work. He has walked his path. And as the valley settles into the deep silence of the night, he drifts into a sleep that is as calm and deep as the river itself. The story of Abu Ubaidah is not a story of thunder, my child. It is a story of the quiet, steady rain that soaks into the earth and makes things grow. It is a reminder that the strongest thing a human can be is reliable. Sleep now. The river is flowing. The stars are watching. And the world is held together by the quiet ones, the ones who stay, the ones who keep their word. Good night, little